Hey everybody, so in today's video we're going to work on our header or nav bar of our full stack blog application. This is going to be the main entry point where you can sign in initially before we set up our login window. But before we move into the header and setting up our front end, I do want to make one small correction to my prior video. The prior video was me setting up the backend APIs, and in the process inside of our SRC, our lib directory and our database.js, this is where we're going to be connecting to our MongoDB Atlas cluster. I made a mistake and said MongoDB URI, but it should be MongoDB URL. That's the way I stored it in the .env file. So my apologies about the mix-up, but just make this correction and that should take care of the issue. And if we run into any issues as we're testing, we'll make sure that we are updating our file accordingly, but we should be good to go. So with that said, we'll go ahead and close out our db.js. And the first thing that we want to do in setting up our front end is let's go to our global.css file. So inside of the SRC, inside of the app directory, let's click on global.css. So inside of our globals.css file, we're going to have the Nextjs boilerplate code already here. Let's go ahead and remove everything except for the Tailwind CSS configurations at the top. So we want to go ahead and bring in the Cinzel Google font. It's free to use. In order to grab this URL, it should be in the description, or you're more than welcome to Google it and use any other font of your liking. So now to access it, let's go ahead and bring in our body tag within the CSS file. We want to access the font family, and as I mentioned, the font type that we want to use is Cinzel. The only other thing that we want to add within this file, at least for right now, is the overflow X, is to hide the actual overflow. I'm not a big fan of my pages being able to move so much on the X-axis. The Y-axis is perfectly fine, but you don't have to make these changes. These are just personal preferences of mine. So let's go ahead and make sure that we save this file, and once you save it, let's go ahead and close it out. So now that we have the CSS updated, the next thing we want to do is bring in our sessions. So a part of the Next-auth setup, we want to wrap our application with the session provider. This is what's going to allow us to use instances of use session throughout the app. This will also make sure that we can navigate pages throughout the browser and Windows while maintaining our authentication and security. So inside of the SRC, let's create a file, and we want to name that file session provider.js. So within the session provider.js file, we want to add in the boilerplate code that's listed on the Next-auth site, wrapping our Next.js application with our session provider and allowing us to use sessions within the individual pages to maintain the authentication session. So first, you want to make sure that you bring in the use client. This is a special annotation from Next.js to make sure that the application knows that this is going to be a client-side page. Next, we want to make sure that we are importing the session provider from Next-auth. Then we want to create a variable called provider. We want to make sure that we're passing in the children and session as props. Then we want to create the session provider itself, and within the provider we want to pass in the session, and then within the session provider make sure that we have the children listed there. This is going to let the application know that we want to pass this throughout everything that's wrapped in this application. And then last but not least, we want to make sure we're exporting this provider so that it allows us to use it throughout the app. So once you have everything here listed, go ahead and click on save, and let's close it out. Now that we have the session set up, let's go ahead and work on some of the visuals for our front end setup. The first directory or folder that we want to set up is for our components. Our components are going to allow us to reuse certain items or certain components throughout our application. So with Next.js, we don't want to set this folder up inside of the actual app, but we do want to set it inside of the SRC. Add a folder named components. And inside of components, we're going to add in a few files. We're not going to set all of the files up in this video, but let's just go ahead and add them for right now. The first file that we want to add is navbar.js. The next file is footer.js. The next one is post.js. The next one is component.js. And last but not least is going to be hero.js. So as I mentioned, we're not going to set all of these up today, but for right now, let's just go ahead and close all of these out except for the navbar.js and the footer.js. So first, within the footer.js, for right now, let's just add in the React functional snippet so that we can have at least the boilerplate snippet on the file when we add it into our layout. So I'll just type in RAFCE, press tab, and if you save this file, we're just going to save it for right now and close it out. And also, we want to do the same thing for our navbar.js. Let's just save it, and for right now, we'll go ahead and close it out. So now that we have those files set up, let's go ahead and start up our next application. But before we start up our next application, let's go ahead and clean up our front end, bring in our navbar and footer, start up our application, and we should see it up and running with the navbar, the footer, and whatever text we want to have on the main page as a slight or a formal greeting. Within the main directory, let's navigate back to the SRC and let's go into the app directory. So inside of our layout.js file, let's go ahead and remove the custom font that's listed here. Let's also update the title to say blog site. And we're not going to do anything with the description right now, as once we complete out the application, we may go back and optimize it for search engine optimization, but for right now, we're not going to worry about it. And then the last thing we want to do before we import our navbar and our session provider is let's just go ahead and remove this class name off of the body, and let's just change the layout of this body tag here and the children so that it looks a little different and a little easier to read. So within our layout.js file, the first thing that we want to bring in is our session provider. So let's go ahead and type in import provider. And if you press tab, it should say import provider from @session provider. This is the session provider that we just created within our SRC. We want to make sure that we're importing it on this particular file because this is where we're going to wrap it throughout the body of our application. So let's just go ahead and do that now before we bring in our navbar. The opening and closing brackets of body with children listed within it. Let's just cut it. And from here, let's just go ahead and type in open bracket provider and close bracket with provider. And if we have this setup listed here, we can press Control V to paste back in our body. And this is going to wrap our application with our session provider. Next, above the children, we want to go ahead and import our navbar. And if you go ahead and type in the open bracket and the navbar, you should have the option to just press tab and it'll automatically import it in. If not, no big deal. Just type it in as you see here on the screen and that'll bring in your navbar. And then directly under the children, we want to go ahead and bring in our footer. And as we see here, it doesn't look like my footer was automatically imported, so I'll just manually type it in. And if you just type in import and then capital F for footer, it should have it listed here. You can click on it or press tab, and then it should automatically import it for you. Now, if you press save, this should save the navbar and footer throughout our application and also wrap the body of our content and provider. So let's go ahead and make sure that everything is up and working properly. Let's just go ahead and close out this particular file. And if we open up our terminal, let's make sure that we are in the correct directory. Right now I'm not, so I'll type in cd blog, which will put it back into the main directory. And if you forgot the name of yours, just click on this Explorer right here, and it's going to be this file or directory listed at the top. Next, I'll type in the command npm run dev to go ahead and start up our server. And it seems that mine is going to be on localhost 3000. If we click on this particular link, and we should see that the Next.js application boilerplate template launches without an error this time. And if you pull down slightly on the screen, you're going to see that there's a nav bar listed at the top, and we don't see the footer at the bottom, but that's okay. Let's go back to our main directory. Inside of the app directory, let's go down to page.js. Inside of page.js, let's go ahead and remove all of the code that we have listed here inside of the main HTML tags and press enter. And let's go ahead and remove the class name that's listed inside of the main HTML tag as well. And just for testing, let's add an H2 and let's just type in hi there or anything that you want to type in just to make sure that it's working. Let's press save. We should see now that our application has the nav bar that we just created, the hi there that we have listed right here, and the footer. So we have our Next.js application up and running. We've cleaned out all of the HTML code that was within the page directory, and we have the main structure starting to come to life. Let's go ahead and begin to work on the nav bar itself. So let's go back to the main directory, and inside of the src, let's open up the components folder. And inside of component, let's click on the navbar.js file. So inside of our navbar.js, let's go ahead and begin by importing a few things we're going to need. First, we need to make sure that we bring in the use client. This is just going to make sure that we're telling Next.js that this is going to be client-side code. Next thing is to import next link. This is going to allow us to create a link instead of having an A tag so that we can navigate within the Next.js application. And as you can see, we're already getting an error. This is because we need to make sure we have use client at the top. So if we import React now and save the file, we should no longer get that error, as you can see, and we're back to our normal React layout. So let's go ahead and, for today's video, let's just go ahead and style our nav bar where we're about to log in functionality in the next one. So first things first, let's go ahead and remove the divs that we have listed here, and we want to type in header. So within our header, we're going to use Tailwind CSS to do some styling. So let's go ahead and add in some styling. First, we want to make the cursor a pointer. Then we want to create a container. Then we want to give the margin on the x-axis. We want that to be auto. That way it automatically pushes in. Then we want to set the padding on the x-axis to be 5, so we have a little bit of indentation. Then we want to say that this is going to be flex, and we want to make sure that it's justified between, because the way we have it set up, we're going to have the blog header on the far left and all of the action buttons on the far right. And we want to give some padding on the y-axis of 4. And we want to make sure that all of the items are centered, and I want to give it a little bit of z-index. That way it stands out over the remaining portion or the hero. So we'll give a z-index of 50. Now if we save this, we'll see that we get a little bit of space listed here, but we really can't see it that well just yet. So the next thing we want to do is create our blog site header, our blog site name or link on the far left hand side. That's going to kind of be like a logo almost, but we're just going to name it blog site. So we want to go ahead and create a div to place this to place the blog site in, and for this it's going to be an actual link, because we want to use this to link back to the home page as we are on the create post page or the post detail page or adding a comment. And then inside of the link, we want to set the href to home. So this is going to be the annotation for home. And then we also want to add a class name for some styling. So let's go ahead and type in blog site right here just so we can see it. All right, and as you can see, it is currently indented because of the padding on the X and the Y axis. So inside of the class name, let's start out by making this text color primary, and we'll go back in and add the primary font inside of our Tailwind CSS config file. And here we want the text size to be 3XL. Then we want to make sure the font is bold. And we want to give it a little bit of hover effect so that when we hover over it, the background changes to primary because the text was previously primary. And then we want to give it a little bit of padding overall, make the padding to be 2. Then we'll give it a little bit of border as well. We'll make the border medium. That way when we hover, we get a little bit of effect. And here we want to make sure we want to add in another hover effect. And for the hover effect, while hovered, we want to change the text color from primary to white. And once we've done that, then we want to give it a little bit of transition once we hover over it. And we want to set the duration of that transition to 300. So if I save it, you'll see that it gets larger and it doesn't look that great right now because we need to add in the primary font, but it does. We do see that it is working. So back in our main directory, let's navigate down to the tailwind.config.js file. Within this file right here where it says extend, let's just add in, well, first we'll press the enter key to tab down, type in colors, colon, and then the open brackets, and then press enter. And if you type in primary, this is going to represent what primary is. And I probably should do this, and we'll do this for the remainder of the application for secondary and for primary button color. But for right now, we'll just set the primary color to the number sign 243748. And if we press save, we should see that the color slightly changes. And if we hover over it, we'll see that we get a little background with the padding and the site text color changes to white. Now, feel free to change these to whatever you like. I set the border to medium, but you can set it to large and it'll basically give a more of a rounder shape. If you go to the tailwind.css config file, there's quite a few custom options that it offers. Take a look at it and see what works for you. But for today's video, we're just going to keep it as is. So I'm not going to worry about adding in the nav bar, the mobile menu in this video. But I do want to go ahead and set up the nav bar and the right side of the nav bar. So under the div here, let's go ahead and type in the HTML tag of nav. We're going to go ahead and add the styling for the nav bar in a responsive way, but we're not going to work on the responsiveness just yet. So inside of the class name, let's go ahead and start out by adding in a transition all, and we want the duration to be 300. Next, let's go ahead and set some margin top, and this is just basically distinguishing what size we want it to be based on the size of our window. And then right here, we want to set the background to be the primary color, which is what we just added in. And then here we want, once the window is on the large screen, we want to make sure that the background is transparent. And this will make more sense once we work on the nav bar, but it's a little more involved for the nav, so we're going to wait and hold off on that today. And then we want to call flex, and we want to set the flex direction of column. This is going to be for the mobile nav itself. And we want to make sure that the width of it takes up the entire screen. And on large screens, we just want to set it to auto so that it automatically fills in. And once it's at the large window, we want to make sure that the flex direction is row. And you'll see the difference. You'll see the row in just a moment. We'll want to make sure that the justified content, or that the items within the row, are centered. And we want to, on large windows, we want to shift those to the end so that there's a space between the blog site and the items that's going to be listed here. And we want to make sure that that is a fix. So here we want to add in flex and top. This is just the positioning of our nav bar. And we want to set the bottom to 0. And we want to make sure that it is taking up the full screen to the right. And on large windows, we want to keep it static. And we want to give it some flex gap as well. On the x-axis, we want to set it to 9. This is just to give some spacing between the links. And we want to make sure that the items are centered so that everything is positioned in a centered throughout the x-axis. Okay, so now that we have the nav set up, let's go ahead and add in the links. And these links are going to be the home, the about, and contact links. We haven't built those pages just yet, but we probably will add those on as additional items. So let's go ahead and add in our unordered list. And inside of our unordered list, let's have a list item. And inside of that list item, we're going to have a link. And this first link is going to be home. and we'll need to set our href as well, and we can set it to the slash route. And let's just go ahead and click save. And right now we don't see it because we were at the mobile view, but now that we've moved it to the desktop view, we see that we have the home link right here. So inside of our unordered list, let's add in the class name, and let's give it a z-index of 50. Let's give it a gap on the y-axis of 5. Let's make sure the items are centered, and we're going to set flex, and we want to give the gap on the x-axis of 5. The flex to column as well. This is going to be for our smaller screens, and you'll see that once we get to that portion. And on the large screens, we want to make sure that the flex is set to row. We want to set the font to semi-bold, a gap on the x-axis of 2, and if we click save, we'll see that our home link changed subtly. So we don't need to add any styling within our list item, but for the class name of the link itself, let's go ahead and set the text color to orange, and you can see the orange has changed on the actual text itself. Let's go ahead and make it larger and set it to 2XL. Let's change the font to bold. Let's give it a little bit of hover effect, that when we hover over it, we get a solid green color of 700. Give it a little bit of padding so that give it a little bit of space when we hover over. Let's give it a border of medium so that we get a little bit of border and it's consistent with the site border as well. And we'll change the text color to white when we hover over it. And of course, we want to give it a little bit of transition, and we'll set it the duration to 300 the same way we did with the other links. And if we hover over it, we'll see that it is giving us that orange effect when we hover, and the text is shifting to white. So we can go ahead and copy and paste these links as well. And let's just, right up under the list item, let's just press enter, and let's add in the second link, and we could change this one to about. So right here for the href, let's add in about, and then let's add in about here for the link. And our next one, let's press enter, and we'll add in contact. So for the slash, we'll add contact right here, and then we'll change it from home to contact. And if we press enter, we'll see that we now have these links appearing here on the far right. Now, the only other links that we need to add are links to the register and to the login window. We will add in the sessions provider because we want this to determine if we're logged in. We want to show the create and log out buttons, and if we're not logged in, we want to show the login and register. So in the next video, we'll go ahead and work on adding in those two links, and we'll add in the session, and we'll also work on the mobile view as well. Thank you so much for checking out today's video. I'll see you in the next